Here with Dr. David Church, expert in protein and metabolism. Focus seems on longevity. So if you could, just give me a little bit of background about your past, how you got here, and what you focus on in your research right now.
Yeah, well, I think like a lot of us that get into this, I was an athlete, my entire like being a little kid growing up, and I worked on a farm as well, and it was quite obvious around me that the other kids were better at sports, and I just naturally was like, hey, like I got to read about. I still have this Sports Illustrated cover that like it was showing like Larry Fitzgerald's workout and what he ate, and I thought that was going to be the thing, and back in the day, I'm dating myself. I remember like the old EAS supplement, like the
Yeah, yeah,
protein.
yeah. How old are you, Dave?
I'll be 35 in August.
Okay.
But they had like Brian Urlacher, like his like it was like an ad, but it was like his workout program and how he would use this supplement. And I was all in. I thought that was like my early research days, I guess. And so from that point on, I just realized I was going to have to like you know, do something else because I just was not as naturally gifted as some of these individuals I was playing with. So I got in the weight room early, for back in those times I was in the weight room. I think at the end of my sixth grade year, certainly in seventh grade, but I think it was like the end of my sixth grade year I was in there, and it was amazing because I got in the weight room like many of us, and suddenly I got a lot better just because you get stronger than especially that early on, you just get strong and everything. And so I played sports, and then I went to my undergrad and I tried my hand at economics. And after pulling like a solid 2.39 GPA that freshman year, I thought, maybe this isn't the path for me. And I
That's
didn't
funny. I
go
was in
in.
finance first.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I spent my
It's a
first
good
six,
basis, you
spent my
know.
first 6 years in doing finance for a company. So
Yeah, drawing ISLM curves was not for me.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
yeah, it just ended up not being my thing. And yeah, I'm actually still only a one class away from a minor in it, but I never took it the next 3 years. I went into exercise physiology, exercise science, and biochemistry. So it wasn't like any easier of a degree, but it was interesting. I got an ex-phys first, and I still was kind of struggling a little bit. And then I got into the biochemistry program, and I kind of doubled. And as soon as I got into biochemistry and I connected small to macro, micro to macro, my grades in both started getting better. So I learned kind of in my undergrad, I needed to know kind of this both sides of the equation. And from there, I went to Baylor, where I ran into Dr. Darren Willoughby, who is a guy that walks the walk and talks the talk, and very, very good muscle physiologist, molecular, side of that in humans. And he happened to know the strength coach, one of the strength coaches at Baylor. So I was working in his lab, and I was a strength intern, to be fair, intern in the strength conditioning program, and did my thesis, and they tricked me like, hey, you're really good at this science thing. You want to go do a PhD? And I was like, yeah, sounds good. And I went and did my PhD. Yeah, I went, and you know how this stuff happens. Went and did my PhD at University of Central Florida. Did a lot of stuff with inflammation actually there, a lot with inflammation, some different supplements, cognition, performance. Did some muscle signaling work as well. So I really got like just like broad spectrum of like kind of what I would say is human performance. There's always usually kind of younger, healthier kids because those are easy to recruit, but kind of broad spectrum physiology in that standpoint. A lot of different supplements. We were a very industry funded lab, and then an opportunity came on with came about from Dr. Ferrando, Dr. Arnie Ferrando, and Dr. Robert Wolf to do stabilized tope tracer methodology, and actually wanted to work in their lab when I was a master's student, and I never thought I'd be able to. And during my PhD, I got an email from them saying they're looking for a postdoc to do stable isotope tracers with like warfighters, and I was like, I'm in. And my wife was like, Little Rock, Arkansas, and now she doesn't want to leave, but we moved up here to Little Rock at University of Arkansas for medical sciences, and then we're in the Department of Geriatrics, but we got to do like a lot of these metabolism work in war fighters, and then in orthopedic populations, elderly, obviously, geriatrics, and a lot of different kind of pathologies and different physiologies, and it's been just really really fun. And I've been here for the last 6 years, and now I direct the lab, which is for anyone that might be a younger scientist. If they offer you a director role, it's a trap. So I do a little bit more of the day to day, not as much of the science nowadays, but it's a lot of fun. And I think you'll appreciate that because we're at an actual hospital. Is anywhere you look, there's a problem that's got to be solved. So it's a fun place to be.
Is there anything, even just as an intro, that you're taking away from this experience as it pertains to protein, muscle, and longevity? Like, what's your high level summary right now, and then we can dive deeper into some of it.
Muscle is a resiliency and longevity organ. That's it. You know, you look in the clinic here, the more muscle you have when you go into whatever it may be, the better the outcomes. And Robin Daly, I was at a conference earlier. He's from Australia, and he had this great figure that I asked him if I could steal, and he was more than willing to let me have it. But it's like a big circle, and it's all these clinical pathologies, including aging. So the aging, orthopedics, surgery, ICU, it doesn't matter. The odds ratio for survival are improved anywhere from, like I think it was like 1.5-fold up to like, I think in surgery, it's a very large effect size for surgery. So across the board in every pathology, the more muscle you have, and maybe we can even make the argument the healthier that muscle is, right? The better your resiliency in a stress scenario, cancer treatment, think about someone going through radiation and chemo and all this. So the better your survival chances and the more resilient you'll be. In fact, in cancer patients, they usually have to stop their radiation and chemotherapy because low muscle mass and therefore the treatment becomes toxic. So that's what I mean when I say it's a longevity and survival organ, because then you could go to the aging world and you'll see, I mean, I know you've seen these papers, but you'll see it, right? Hand grip strength, muscle mass, all cause mortality, all cause mortality. It's always a protective of all cause mortality and beneficial in that regard. So that's my high level overview.
You would see muscle as probably one of the most important investments for function
Yeah.
in life. And I think people dismiss how slowly it can degrade, how quickly it can degrade over time, that compound effect. And they maybe don't take it as important here and now. I'm 43, or people like me, 50, 30, in those age ranges where you're still fine. You're still functioning independent. And when you get to these ages that are maybe 70, 80, or you're confronted with some of these major health issues, that's the time you need it. But you've been losing it at such a rate over time that now you're not strong when you need to be strong. So in that regard, do you see muscle as that investment, almost like a 401k for your body?
Yeah, I always make the joke that the best health insurance I have is my garage gym and then my gym membership. Obviously, exercise is a whole body stressor, so it's not just the muscle. I want to make that clear. Like, we can't be entirely muscle centric. We have to respect the fact that it's the heart has to be good, the lungs have to be good, right? But I certainly think stressing the muscle in a when you're healthy to make it stronger and make the rest of your body more resilient is probably a very wise move to have a long life and health span.
One of the things I wanted to get into was just to get the basics of some protein things so we can get into some of these topics. Can you give me the basics of what protein is, maybe even get a little bit into protein quality as far as amino acids, how that's not all the same?
Mm-hmm.
What do you see generally for a person that they should be considering as far as like quantities and quality of protein?
Yeah, so I mean, just from a standpoint of what protein is there's two ways we think about it. There's dietary protein, right? And that can come in many forms. We'll touch on protein quality a little bit here, but you know, obviously you have, animal proteins, pork, beef, chicken, milk. Probably like one of the milk's like such a fascinating thing, right? Because you look, and we're getting ahead of ourselves here, but if you look, saturated fat's always like associated with cardiovascular disease, but not milk fat. So milk's like one of those weird ones.
Yeah.
Eggs, but then you have like some more of the plant-based proteins. So you're thinking like quinoa, soy, the brown rice protein stuff's getting popular now, and all the blends, hemp, and I've even seen like pumpkin seed, protein. When I can't imagine the amount of pumpkin seeds they need to make a pumpkin seed protein
I also
isolate.
know that.
Mind blowing. Yeah. I mean, it's good in a way because like all these parts are getting used. So that's like the dietary protein angle. And then you have like the protein in the body, right? And that's like proteins are everywhere. Like proteins do what we would call the work of the cell, right? I mean, you can look if you get into it, there's these proteins that have feet that literally have like a molecular motor in them, and they're carrying things across the cell. They literally do the work of a cell. So without like what we call a healthy proteome, which means all the protein that the proteins in your body are optimally functioning, something's going wrong. And so we eat dietary protein to replace the proteins in our body, right? So it's just kind of this continuous cycle. A piece on the protein qualities, we often do split it animal versus plant, but there's even things like the digestibility, right? I mean, so like milk protein or like any drink, so that's when we could get into soy protein isolates, whey protein isolate, or even crystalline essential amino acids. Those get in the gut and they're digested very quickly. They get right out in the bloodstream versus if you eat something like making my joke about two chicken breasts, right? If I was to eat two chicken breasts back like I did back in the football days, relatively still very quickly digesting, but you're going to get this much more low, not as high of a peak from the amino acids, which make up the protein. You don't get this high peak like you do with the drink. You get a lower peak, but still, a good peak. And then kind of it stays out there in the bloodstream for a very long period of time. So
Is that a benefit that it's staying in the bloodstream for longer periods of time to be able to like you'll see even like bodybuilders will take casein at night because it's slow digesting. A lot of this I'm not a fan of, but
yeah,
do you see a benefit to having that release of amino acids and proteins compared to say a supplement that would be a much quicker release?
someone would call me out maybe by saying the study hasn't been done, but like fast or slow digesting proteins, but they're always looking at whey versus like a casein.
Right.
And those are both, in my book, fast. Those are casein is going to get out there way quicker than a whole food source. Like Nick Bird from the University of Illinois has great work where he gave like salmon and then he gave the constituent of the parts, crystalline amino acids, fish oil, and then like, some of the coconut oil to make up the
Okay.
saturated. Yeah. So he gave like the constituent parts in the salmon and the salmon gave a lower plasma amino acid response as compared to like, just giving the crystalline and matching the macros, but it wasn't statistically significant. But in our world, if you see what we call muscle protein synthesis, if you see something like a 25-30% higher, muscle protein synthetic rate, it's kind of what we would consider clinically significant. You're kind of above the noise. We would say it's a real effect. And he saw that actually, that the salmon gave a kind of a 25% higher rate of muscle protein synthesis as compared to the constituent parts. So even though the peak was lower, right, it gave a better functional change at the muscle level, like a metabolic outcome. Whereas admittedly, I have data that shows that the quicker the amino acids get out there, the higher the rate of muscle protein synthesis. So I'm just trying to show that both sides of the coin here. Like his data says that data I've collapsed across a bunch of different studies say the quicker it gets out there, the higher the rate. But what that means on a long term standpoint, I don't know if we have a great answer to. To be honest with you, it may not matter. I think the total protein daily intake is maybe what's more salient for most people.
Okay. Now, you brought up the constituents of the parts of the salmon, which I
Right.
imagine means he was matching probably the amino acid profile of
Aminos,
salmon.
aminos, fat, and just kind of the macros. Yeah, not the micro part.
Now, do you have any beliefs on or research in the quality or the types of amino acids that maybe are either more important, which could maybe make a certain food group more important? Or do you think if you hit a minimum threshold, you're going to cover them and it's not going to matter? Like, you hear a lot about leucine being closely related to protein synthesis. You'll hear maybe there's different researchers in protein that I've watched in different things and studied that say, if you're a vegan, then maybe you need to get this amount of protein in your diet because to make sure you cover all your bases of amino acids. Versus if you are eating meat, you may need a little less because of the higher digestibility and the higher amino profile of those essential amino acids. Do you have any beliefs or research in any of that?
Yeah, I actually agree with that 100%. And I have we just put a paper in review for the second round of revision. So maybe by the time this is up, I don't know how quickly you move, where we compared the Impossible Burger to a beef burger, and we measured the muscle protein synthetic rate and the plasma essentials. And so what we did was originally we were just going to do like a 4 ounce beef burger versus a 4 ounce Impossible Burger because they're to the Impossible Burger's credit, if you look at it, they've done a good job trying to mimic what a beef patty is. And I think we have to recognize that it's a great route for people to go that want to be vegetarian or vegan for whatever reason. So like we do need to like realize that. But I got lucky and I thought, we're gonna get in trouble because the beef burger has more protein and more essentials than the Impossible Burger. And people are saying we're just gonna be biased here. So we actually added on a double Impossible Burger group. So they got two 4 ounce patties. So a single beef burger, depending on the source, but like depending on the source you look at, somewhere around like 25 grams of protein, 9 to 10 grams of those are essential amino acids. And so to
Okay.
your point about protein quality, I think beyond, if you're going to look beyond total protein intake, I would just look at total essential amino acids. If it's high in total essentials, it's going to be high in leucine. It's going to be high in all that other stuff. And I say that because essential amino acids are essential for increasing protein turnover. The non-essentials don't increase protein turnover. So you need And what I mean by that is, kind of like the oil change for your body's proteome.
Remodeling,
Um,
rebuilding.
yeah, remodeling, rebuilding, and all that. So the essentials really kickstart that process. The non-essentials, there's a study from, I think I was 8, so 97, 98, where they gave, 18 grams of essentials and then like 18 grams of essentials and 18 grams of non-essentials. And then they gave like 36 grams of non-essentials, and the 36 grams of non-essentials did nothing. But the other two groups were the exact same, showing that the essentials are what moves the needle. So the point being is that beef burger's got about 25 grams of protein, about 10 grams of essentials, whereas the Impossible Burger, I believe, is right around 20 grams, give or take. There's some variability in this. There's some papers that point that out, but then it's like 7-ish grams of essentials. So it's like right there. You and I, it's similar, but to like scientists, it's going to be like that. Maybe that might have been enough, and
Right,
so
right, right.
then we doubled it up, and the double group actually has like 15 grams of essentials and like 36 grams of protein, you know. And so the point I'm getting to is that Impossible Burger, the two Impossible Burger group gave you the same muscle protein synthetic response and whole body protein synthetic response, so the making of new proteins, as the 4 ounces of the beef burger, even though that Impossible Burger had 5 more grams of essentials and almost double the amount of protein. So the double Impossible Burger had 50% more essentials than a single beef patty and almost double the amount of protein, but it gave you the same muscle and whole body protein synthetic response as the 4 ounces of beef.
I'm really biased. I will straight up admit it to everyone. And I say I'm biased
Well, it just highlights your point. Now you have
out
the
of
data.
research. It's more that I'm against, separate from the protein and the amino acids. But I think you said two important things here that are interesting. One, there was a study that's comparing isolated parts, like of the salmon, and
Uh-huh.
comparing it to the real salmon, and the salmon created more protein synthesis, even if not statistically
It's
relevant.
clinically relevant, I would say, for
Okay,
sure.
clinically awesome. So that's showing once again a whole piece of food with real natural amino acids will beat something that's trying to mimic it.
Yeah.
And then in your Impossible Burger, my bigger problem with the Impossible Burgers isn't even the protein content and things like that. It's more of I see it as a processed piece of food in
Hmm.
comparison to a real piece of food. So they're stitching together oils and things like that. And so it's not about plants or meat to me. It's more about eating plants in their natural form and trying to take isolated parts to make real food. So it's interesting that you're saying in that research, even though they had more protein, higher amount of amino acids, that it's had similar effects to something that was lower natural. But is that how you take that?
Yeah, and I was actually gobsmacked when I saw the initial, because we also measure the plasma essential amino acids, so the amount that you eat and then the amount that gets out in the plasma, right? And I was shocked that the Impossible Burger, the two, everything I'm talking about here is the two Impossible Burgers. So 8 ounces of Impossible Burger had 50% more essentials than the 4 ounces of beef. And despite having 50% more of those essential amino acids, it had a lower the concentrations of the plasma essential amino acids were lower than the 4 ounces of beef, and that's to your digestibility point. And to be fair, it's the Impossible Burger is mostly soy, and soy is well known for having kind of a greater gut uptake, and it does not get out into the plasma. It's like a well documented phenomenon.
Is
So
there
to your
other cofactors that could
it,
impact that?
well, with the
Like that's in
Impossible
meat,
Burger,
that's in meat
certainly.
versus an Impossible Burger?
With Impossible, certainly, because there's the binders. That's what I was thinking about the whole time, was that you have the binders and some of the glue they're using to keep that all together, that maybe is not allowing the enzymes of the gut to get at the piece of food stuff as much as like you could with beef. But to be fair, when they give a soy protein isolate, they still see a greater amount of the aminos being sequestered in the gut as compared to milk, like a milk protein. So it's not like this is very, I mean, this is not controversial at all. It's like
Okay,
well,
right, right, right.
way before plant versus animal was like an online debate.
Yeah, yeah, I know.
But it brings to your point, where I would agree that you can certainly do it from plant-based sources, but you need more. Like exactly how you led this off, right? It was that you've heard this, and I would agree, and that's what that data is kind of showing, is that we needed, almost 40 grams of the protein coming from the Impossible Burger to get you kind of the same response at, 20, 25 grams of the beef burger. And that seems to hold up. I think there's a lot of data showing that nowadays, not just from our lab, but I know like Stu Phillips at McMaster has talked about this at length. Luke Van Loon over in the at Maastricht has talked about this as well. So, I mean, you have three different countries, three different labs, all kind of come to the same conclusion. And so I think the take home point here is if, for like the general population, if you're going to get up to, and, training and this, that, and the other, you get up to like 1.6 grams per kilogram per day, probably got your bases covered. I would say if you get to like, start talking about like older adults, it would probably behoove them to maybe consider some animal-based proteins if they could, and if they really want to be as plant-based as they could, well, maybe we could meet them in the middle. I'm really interested in this idea of could we meet them in the middle? Like could we get them to eat an egg on their Impossible Burger, right? Like could we
Right.
use something like that, like some sort of renewable kind of resource that maybe they would feel comfortable with, or there's some people that are okay with eating like I think it's mollusk. Comment section, correct me if I'm wrong, but like could we find a way that as they get older, if they really want to be as whether they want to do it for humane reasons or whatnot, could we find a way to meet them in the middle with, like you said, a whole food source? But I certainly think as you get older, some of that it might become a little bit more salient because what people need to realize is that most older adults don't have the appetite. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So we have to be more efficient with delivering the amino acid in an older group. And then a worst case scenario becomes, okay, well, if they don't want to do animal proteins and they're older and they don't have a huge appetite, then you could do something like a crystalline amino acids, because they can be sourced from vegan or vegetarian sources. And they're, it's just the essentials. They're highly digestible, and you don't need, data shows you can have as few as 5 grams of those and kind of get an increase in the muscle protein synthetic response. So that's kind of, I've always couched that. There's some nerdum in there, but there's some pretty salient take home points.
I never have an opinion over you have to do it this way or that way.
No,
I'm very much more against like I believe you need to know where to get what to eat efficiently. Um,
right.
so I'm a big, huge fan of. I always there's a thing like with our community, like I post these monster salads that I eat all the time, but I think that is an efficient way to get volume, nutrients, uh, fulfilling yourself, fiber, things like that. Whereas I do believe in meat and eggs and things to get quality aminos. And when you blend those together, and I think that can be on a spectrum. There's people that love eating nothing but meat, and there's people
Yeah.
like I say, hey, even if you want to be all the environmental, the politicized issues related to this, which I really try not to get into. I'm trying to just be here for help. Then maybe like if that's really your thing, go to a more responsible farm. And I don't want to tie you into these beliefs either, but I'm just saying go to a responsible farm, maybe eat less of it, but a little bit can go a long way,
Yeah.
even small amounts each day to bring you that amino acid profile that can dramatically improve your health for because I think what you're speaking to is as we age, and you kind of touched on it, there's this turnover process. Protein is constantly breaking down in the body. And when we're
Yep.
young, it's easy, right, to replenish that.
Yeah. 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 There's a reason 18 to 30-year-olds fight our wars. You know what I mean? Like,
Right, right, right.
yeah, like they're indestructible.
And then as you get older, that breakdown, it's really hard to create enough protein
Mhm.
synthesis to match what you're losing. And that is part of the aging process and the function that you spoke to in the beginning and what your work is in.
Yeah, yeah, and I agree with you. By the way, I always get a question when I bring up protein quality. Almost every that I get asked about something about it'll be an environmental question or this, that, and then I always go, I grew up on a farm. I'm a physiologist. That if you want someone that really knows, like I see the headlines of the different things, but like I soil science, environmental science, that's an entirely different lane. You need to go talk to someone that does that day in and day out. But you want to talk about human physiology, I can answer those questions. Yeah,
Right.
I'm right there with you. Like, there's a few people that I know that do environmental science and soil science, and it's like, oh man, your methods are so foreign to me. So, like I mean, they're going and taking soil samples, and it's like, yeah, I can see how you get a PhD in that. But yeah, no, I agree with your point about like as you get older, you just have to be a little bit more efficient at getting these nutrients because it's harder to move the needle with an older adult. And plenty of these, I keep talking about muscle protein synthesis, but there's plenty of papers that have shown that the muscle protein synthetic rate, the higher your turnover, right? That's kind of our measure of turning over this system, the better your function is, the better strength is. So I mean, right there, that tells you that this is an important mechanism that we need to consider. And so yeah, I mean, as you get older, you got to
What
find a way
causes
to get
that?
it in.
What causes that turnover to accelerate that turnover? Is it exercise? Is it the amount of protein you're consuming? What can improve that?
Exercise by far is the most potent stressor
Okay.
by far. And by the way, I love the big salads. I've recently, like in the last 6 months, right there with you. I'm just like letting people know, big salad, chicken breast on there, salsa or something. It's filling. It tastes good. Like I've totally been converted.
I think,
Um,
yeah, everyone makes fun of, all my friends make fun of me for loving salads, but I eat plenty of meat and I eat plenty of greens and I sprinkle in my
yeah,
fruits and my starches, but
and I
um,
feel better, so that's what matters at the end of the day. But yeah, sorry to get on that salad tangent. Just you brought it up, and I meant to say I love like the 1.3
now I'm
pound
trying to
salad.
make salads cool for dudes.
Yeah,
Trying to
I'll help you
make
out as
it badass
best I
for,
can. But so exercise is by far like, Dr. Stu Phillips up there, my master, always say exercise is king, protein intake's queen. So it's exercise first and foremost, and it doesn't, what I'm learning myself. I got 2 kids now, and that was I'd done well. I kind of lost that initial all that weight, and then I had the kids, and I gained it back, and now we're done with that. So I'm kind of getting back to where I was, and I've lost the weight again. And what I'm finding is sometimes it's like I got home, got the kids down. It's 8:30. I got some work to do. It's like, okay, I got 20, 30 minutes. I'm getting in the garage gym, which is a luxury, admittedly. But I get in there, I do like 8 exercises, and it's a circuit 3 times through. I run to the end of the street back, do a set of deadlifts, do some jump rope, I do tons of body weight stuff, even just, 25-pound dumbbells. It's 20, 30 minutes. I get in, I get a little bit of small protein, or like, I like to do the low carbohydrate milk, and I freeze
yeah,
it.
yeah. Yep.
I do the ice cubes, and I'm old school. I don't have a
Oh,
Ninja creamer.
wow.
Yeah, I freeze it in ice cubes and I dump it into like just an old school blender, and I make my little, ice cream. I like to get the
Oh, that's a
that.
nice little hack.
Yeah,
Nice
yeah,
little,
yeah. Well, I'm cheap. I'm a young assistant professor at an academic medical school. Time will tell, but I don't like monotaskers. So, and but like it's like amazing what that 20 or 30 minutes can do. And then I go and I get work done. So people I think kind of pull back, when we say exercise, and they think of like what I used to do, and it's just like clanging and banging, 5 sets of 5 West Side,
yep.
um, and I love that, but it's not the time and place in my life for that. So I think if you can find something that you can get in 20, 30 minutes a day, get that heart rate up, make it high intensity, like, and something you can do consistently, that's huge.
What you're speaking to too is I think everyone's not kind of is trying to find a perfect method. And I think what's interesting, especially for most people, like the higher you go up
Yeah.
the performance scale, the higher you go up into your field, yes, it gets different. But for the common person trying to be healthy, look good, live long, when you study these different approaches, like I'm sure you've seen, and I wonder even if what research says, but you'll see people at the top of their profession doing full body circuits that are
Hmm.
2 or 3 days a week. That's it. You'll see
Yeah.
certain camps that are doing 2 a days. You'll see certain camps that are doing isolated body parts. So it's like different things work, and I think different people need to just find what works for them, while just kind of honoring these principles, these basic principles.
I
Doing it's
can
more
agree.
important than being perfect.
Yeah, I agree with you totally. Like I used to hate running, and now I run more than I lift. And people, because it was like I was worried about my gains, and I always make the
Yeah.
joke on these talks. It's like actually my quads have gotten bigger.
Yeah.
It's
So,
it's it's like that angiogenesis piece is like really important for getting nutrients to the muscle. Who would have thought? And like all the gains I've wasted, like I should have just been doing a little bit of anaerobic conditioning on my own instead of making my coach do it. So
well, let me bring this up for you, with longevity, because I thought about this when I tore my ACL, and I've seen it in different places. That a lot of times some people will say it's normally not the slow decline. I mean, it is the slow decline that will get us, but a lot of times an event will happen in someone's life that they age 10 years theoretically. I'm just making that up, but they'll
right.
age quickly because of an event. Like, for example, you tear your ACL at 53 or 43, and you don't go back to training and focusing on it. And maybe you lost a lot of function, range of motion, and even muscle size that you may not notice right now walking around, but it's going to impact you by the time you're at 70. Do you see with the population you work with that events do that? And I mean, that's a big part of the having function. So you don't fall, break a hip, do these things that cause these catastrophic events in people's life?
Yeah, it's called a catabolic stress model. That's exactly
Oh,
what it is. So you get this continual decline that occurs. That's a natural part of aging. And we in men we think we can maybe offset it with some TRT and healthy lifestyle stuff for sure. And those are all reasonable. But you're still going to get a decline, right? Father Time is undefeated, like
right, right, right.
literally undefeated. And but then like you're saying, like say and you see maybe someone that doesn't work out as much as yourself, right? And they're just on this natural decline, and they tear their ACL, and there's going to be this natural decrease, right? You have this normal line of like this, but now you go down, and you do the PT is prescribed, and you do it, and you get back up to like 50, 80%. Like you said, you're a couple years out, you work out a lot, you're still not back to where you think you were, but they stopped working out. Now they're right back on that trajectory. So they would have been here, now they're here. So that's called like the catabolic stress model. I think is actually what gets people more than anything. There's like a fall, particularly like an older adult. They fall, they break something, they go in for surgery, then they go to a skilled nursing facility because they're trying to get used to their walker or whatnot. They never really get back up because a lot of them have this low appetite. They're not taking in protein. They're tired. They don't want to do the PT. They get to their home. They're supposed to be using the walker and they're not great at it. They fall again. They fall again. They fall again. Now they're in the skilled nursing facility or nursing home full time, basically bedridden. Now they're in a wheelchair and just on down it goes. Like I mean,
You
there's a
kind of fall.
reason. Yeah, there's a reason falls are like the big thing we're trying to like avoid older adults doing. There's just yeah. I mean, they'll say they died because of whatever gets them in the hospital, but they really died because they started falling so much. You know what I
Right.
mean?
I think people just fall behind the power curve. And I think
That's a great way of putting it. Yeah.
a lot of us in our age group, 30, 40, 50, you're still fine.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
don't think of it that way, but you just
Yeah.
don't realize. So if you don't mind, I want to get into so you touched on a little bit a meat could go a long way, or even
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
animal products because of the amino acids.
Mhm.
You mentioned 1.6 per kilogram per day as kind of like a minimal threshold. Do you see that, or what's like a
Oh,
rough
I'd
number?
say
Yeah, I work out generally. I'm a normal person. I'm trying to take care of myself. What's your minimum threshold you tell them to hit? That's clinically like it matters. Like, and I'm not talking about surviving. I'm talking about thriving.
yeah. Okay. I'm gonna break this down into like two or three pieces because like this is what we do, and so I could do it all day. But I would say so. There's like the whole concept of the RDA, right?
Yeah.
And the RDA is for every different type of nutrient. For vitamin C is to avoid scurvy, right? For carbohydrate is the amount that the brain needs in a day, right? And you can go on down the list, and what you'll notice is it's to avoid X Z state. For protein, it's to maintain a zero nitrogen balance. Nothing about avoiding a disease state. So
Right.
right there, like criticizing the RDA is like a dicey thing to do in my world, but I do it a lot. So the RDA is a poor definition, particularly for protein, because it's not based off avoiding a disease state, and it also, if you look at the data that it's pulled from, I would actually make an argument that you're not avoiding that zero balance. It's from Rand. I forget the year, but it's Rand and it's American Journal of College Nutrition. I think it might be 2002, 2001, and it's a ton of data. But if you actually look, and if you go to the point in their data, by the way, their data also shows that there's never, as you bring in more protein, the net balance just keeps going up. They don't show a break point. So when you hear people start talking about a break point, not really sure if I agree with that. But if you look
Meaning,
at the point,
just to
meaning like
break that
break
down,
point, like you can take in enough that it'll flatten out. And from
that
yeah, like the curve. So like as more protein comes in, whatever you're measuring no longer keeps going up.
right.
For maybe a functional outcome like mass strength over a year, there's probably a break point at which, yeah, you're just the body's saturated. But from a metabolic metabolic standpoint, kind of seems like that system will still run. And you got to remember, most of the Fed state losses and most of the Fed state gains we get are lost at night. That's not a bad thing, right? Because that means we're just turning over. We're getting a really good oil change, so to speak.
Right. Right. Okay.
Um, but if you look at kind of where on that graph, no one's no longer in a zero balance. You kind of get to what would be like 1.2 grams per kilogram per day. And there's plenty of other places I've seen this. We've looked at some stuff internally, and it seems kind of 1.2 grams per kilogram per day. Even 1.1 in Haynes data, which is kind of the U.S. average, will say that most people take in 1.1. So if you look at the average, we're not far away. So 1.1, 1.2 is where I'd argue you probably have a true break point. You're not having nitrogen body losses. Now, that said, the body is very adaptable and there's a lot of variability in human physiology. So some people might be able to bring in 0.2 grams per day and not have any losses. So we do have to acknowledge that. That's why it's kind of a dicey situation talking about the RDA. But I think 1.2, when you want to talk about like population wide metrics and make sure people are over, 1.2, 1.1 is certainly reasonable. I think if you look at the data, Rob Morton's got a nice paper. It's a little bit old, but it's stood up well over the test of time, even as we get more data. It kind of seems for most of us that 1.6 grams per kilogram per day is going to maximize these functional outcomes. Like I'm talking body composition, strength, performance. The caveat there is if you're in a caloric deficit, and I don't know if I'd go any farther than 30%. Some people argue 40. The late Kevin Tipton and I had multiple conversations about this. And, they'd always recommend 40, but if you look at the data, a lot of the standard deviations for the performance and the body composition changes, some people were having losses of performance and body comp at 40% caloric deficit. The mean would be like, positive or they maintain, but some people were actually having losses. But if you go to 30%, it seems like most people can, the standard deviation, most people are not losing. They're maintaining or maybe even getting a little bit better.
And
But the
what's the
point is,
protein concentration at that 30% deficit?
I was going to say you can at that
1.6.
point you can start looking at like 2 to 2.2, 2.4. Is kind of where you could get to at that point. So along with resistance exercise, right? You
So,
you can't you can't just in my opinion, you need both.
so what you're speaking to is as you're cutting your calories or as you're losing weight and in that
Mhm.
state, there is a need or at least a benefit to having more protein in
Yeah,
that in
yeah.
that situation, that environment.
The increased protein intake will allow you to maintain your muscle mass during the weight loss. Yeah,
Okay, so this you brought up a lot of stuff I want to ask you about now. So
that's
there's
great.
first, do you believe, and now you're researching, if not, then it's cool. But do you believe in anything related to the hunger will sometimes, you'll hear sometimes like people have hunger associated to wanting a certain nutrient.
Yeah,
Do you believe in anything like the body is searching for protein and they will eat it? And I would say maybe the typical American probably does eat enough protein. Absolutely.
mm.
But we do it in a very inefficient way where we over consuming calories and processed food in conjunction with to get to those protein levels. Is there anything in research that you see associated with the body will seek out protein to get to a certain threshold?
Yeah. That's called the protein leverage hypothesis. I'm sure you've run
Yeah.
across it. Yeah, if you don't know by that name, you've probably read papers on it. From a satiety hunger hormone standpoint, uh, Dr. Heather Leidy and Dr. Jeff Squin are some of the experts in this. They've done a lot of work in it, and they do show that. Particularly, they do like a breakfast skipping model, and they've shown that higher protein takes at breakfast that helps satiety throughout the day. Um, the protein leverage hypothesis is all about what you're saying about like you're gonna eat the calories you need to get like the protein that your body requires, so to speak. And so that's why some of these approaches where people are looking at like is it Ted Naiman? I think is he's
Yeah.
on. I've
Yeah.
seen him on I've seen him on
Like
Twitter
protein
before.
ratio diet, I believe.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've seen him on Twitter
Yep.
before, and I've seen the protein ratio diet, like total protein to calorie ratio, and I'm always like, that's an interesting. That's basically the protein leverage hypothesis in a nutshell. That's as soon as I see that, that's what I think of. But that's kind of like the length of what I know about like the protein leverage hypothesis. I do a lot more of like these either like longer feeding studies where we're looking at mass, function, performance, or these short-term changes where I'm looking more at like metabolism. The behavioral standpoint is not my strong suit, although I certainly am an advocate for like when you sit down, maybe eat, if you're trying to lose weight, or like where it's maybe most salient on like a GLP-1 inhibitor or like the GLP and the GIPs right now that do suppress your appetite. I
Mhm.
think going to like a eat your protein first model of like what's on your plate is probably a good behavioral thing to do. But
Okay.
that is like the most I can play in that sandbox of the protein leverage hypothesis. I will say personally, I've seen it happen. When I'm sitting there eating food and like you're kind of waiting for like oh what I want. You go grab like a rice cake, you little put a peanut butter on it, whatever, and you're eating it like yeah, I'm still hungry, and then finally like I'll just eat some chicken breast up or something. I keep going to chicken breast. I'm not sponsored by them, like whatever you got in the fridge or like an egg or something, and then it's like and then you eat it and you're like oh shoot, um, that took care of the problem. It's like everything I was eating was like not doing the job, or like I grab a protein bar, whatever, and I happen to get like, kind of like 20 grams of protein, and it's like, oh, hunger's gone away. But that's just research is me search, I always say, and so that's kind of like where I've seen it.
That's where I think that combination of if I can kind of like get a control on, I know it's overblown right now, but like insulin, sugar, blood sugar response, and it's okay to obviously have a high blood sugar response to things sometimes, especially in certain conditions. But when it's chronic and people tend to eat empty processed foods, that's doing that. And then if you're under eating, specifically women, I work with a lot of women,
Okay. Yeah.
will eat protein. They think they're eating a lot of protein or not. And you bring those two together, and I feel like it just sets you up for a lot of hunger, a lot of moodiness, a lot of inconsistent energy. Whereas if you can bring
Mhm.
together any type of diet that's controlling blood sugar, eating real foods, with veggies and things like that, and even fruits and whatnot, combined with high quality proteins, I feel like it sets you up for behavioral success. Does it matter if I have 3 meals of protein that are at least a certain level? Or can someone do, I fast and I eat one big, huge meal or 2 meals a day? Like, do you guys see clinically any difference in that?
So I'll start with the protein distribution piece. There's been a lot of different study. I have one running right now, so I'll get into the details of that in a second. But there's been enough studies at this point that like I really think we can rule out that like from a muscle metabolism standpoint, like I'm gonna lose my gains if I do intermittent fasting. Totally probably not the trick case. Like we see that right now it seems like it's dead set, dead even. There's not like this if there's this effect of like evenly distributing it, it's quite small. In
Okay.
fact, only one study saw a statistically significant improvement, and then that was in 2014. And I mean, 1.1 grams per kilogram was the intake. It was over 24 hours. But all the studies since then, it's like almost dead even. I have a study going right now where we're doing the 6-18 model, kind of as extreme of a fast as you probably realistically could do. It's not one meal a day, obviously. It's not that model, but I mean, realistically, you're talking about 6 hours. They're basically eating the whole 6 hours to get the food in them.
Okay.
So you know what I mean. Versus
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
your standard kind of like three. It's the 13-hour day we bring them in for, and then they come back the next day to do like a 24-hour snapshot, but eating it over like a normal three meals a day, type thing. So they're kind of in a fed state for almost 18 hours of the day. So it'll be really interesting what that data shows us. We're doing some things that have been looked at from like a breakdown standpoint. A lot of it's been just synthesis derived. So we'll hopefully have another answer there and everything. But the point is, that's a lot of words to say like, yeah, you can probably just get your total protein intake in a day however you want. I think what's most important is what works best for you. I know, like, I don't like to have a lot of food on my stomach when I work out, so I need either some time away from it, but also at the same time, the best time for me to get in is the beginning of the day because the fires are going to come,
Yep.
they're
Yep.
going to come. So if I can get in there and I can get a good hard workout in and kind of tire myself out, I'm a little bit more mellow the rest of the day, and the stuff doesn't bother me as much. So what I try to do is I try to get a little bit of coffee just to kind of get the system going, but I like the even the native whey, some type of crystalline amino acid or native whey product. I kind of like those. Something's kind of like low impact on the gut, but kind of gets me some sort of protein, some sort of nutrition out there. I don't. I get some sugar. I do some sugar in my coffee and some cream in my coffee, and I don't really worry about it. So maybe I'm getting a little bit of like more energy macronutrients there too. But I have gone to that if I'm gonna like when I go in the morning. That way, it's not like true fasted.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's what I've done, but that's just because it works for me. But I
Think
from a distribution standpoint, I don't think it matters too much. It's just what works best for you.
as long as you're hitting that total number.
As long as you're the total number, and like for me, if I eat these big meals, I used to do this. Used to eat these big meals. I did the one meal a day approach in the past. I just get so tired.
Right.
I just be so tired. So I find like I kind of like smaller. I just like smaller meals now. Like and kind of more throughout the day. And it has absolutely nothing to do with muscle. It just has to do with how it makes me feel. you know,
Right. Right.
it's
Right.
yeah. But and partly because I'm hitting my daily protein target. And so it's I think it all comes out in the wash. And to your point, I think whatever works for someone, I look at a daily to weekly viewpoint. Like, so, if I'm tracking weight, I try to look over the course of a week because there's tons of fluctuation. And I've noticed that those weight water fluctuations seem to kind of even out over the course of a week. And so I just don't get too worried about it daily. And then in the course of a day, I just kind of worry about, yeah, or I'm a little short. Let's go ahead and hit this Fairlife Frosty here. You know what I mean? And get the
My
protein.
protein number, right?
Yeah, yeah. That's kind of how I look at it. That's me personally.
People weighing
So,
themselves daily when you're working with weight loss clients is by far definitely.
and I'll
Um,
say on that point, so I that has worked for me.
because it keeps you motivated,
Well,
right?
and
Keeps you
like,
engaged.
yeah, I have every weight recorded for like the last 3 years, except for like when I'm traveling, and people think like, oh, doesn't that give you anxiety? And I said it did in the beginning. It did in the beginning because I was
Like,
seeing this type thing. But now that I've done it so long, I've learned like, oh, I'm up 2 pounds this morning. I'll be gone in 2 days. And so I actually have no more anxiety about it.
right, because the knowing helps you. I'm the same way with tracking calories and my amino macros. I don't like 100% track.
Yeah,
And I try to advise people that you don't have to do that. But for me, I feel like if I track the top half of my day, it brings me peace. I know I'm dialed in. It doesn't make me feel like lost in space.
yeah,
And to me, it's like it's a very good relationship with it. I like the foods I'm always picking. I'm not ever like depriving myself, but I like to be in a certain range, and it makes me feel connected to what I'm doing. But with weight loss clients, sometimes they're new that don't understand any of the science. They could fluctuate because of the hormones, because of their menstrual cycle, because of the where the moon is, because of the salt intake, because of whatever, how much they sweat the day before. And it's like
yeah,
they just don't they think it's fat. Like they think it's just fat. So, and that part's like very sometimes like, dude, chill out, weigh yourself once a week for me right now, just in the beginning while I'm getting you going. Like, but anyway,
yeah. And I like your point about the top half of the day. So like, and by the way, some of the stuff I've just like fallen into because it works. Like it's not,
right, right.
like I make it clear, like none of this is like I'm not talking any science here. I'm just talking about like what works for David. And I eat over the course of the week, right? I mean, it changes from week to week, but basically in a given week, I eat the same thing from when I wake up to dinner. And dinner is like the variable because we have young kids, so we can't eat the same thing every day. I'm someone that doesn't mind eating the same lunch 5 days in a row.
I'm
It
that
does
way too.
not
Yeah.
phase me. And I actually like it because it's lower bandwidth about what I have to worry about. I know I'm hitting my nutrition. I'm knowing getting my protein in. I'm getting a green in. I'm getting the right amount of carbs that works for me. And and then I just get to lunch and it's like I kind of know what I have to play with, you know, and
Yep.
I fill it in as I want. Obviously, there's a little bit of privilege there because we have the knowledge of like
Yeah.
what we're
Yeah.
eating. Um, but I do like
That's
that idea
exactly,
of
that's exactly
tracking the
the
top
system
end of
does
your
that.
day. Yeah,
So our system actually does that, which is cool that all the macros are worked out, but it's like all just like completely normal food. So if
yeah,
someone goes in and picks in our system, it's like you literally are just, it looks like you're just eating a dinner, but all the proteins, everything are already figured out for you. And I think what a lot of people like in that is that they just have the same way I like if I track my top half of my day, because I know what I'm going to eat. I'm eating a GFIT dinner. So it's like they go eat a meal, they know they're checking the box. Like it's good. I know
yeah,
macros and the ingredients are handled, but I always get to the gym at 1,200 calories, about 1,300 calories. And I do a little like, I don't call it carb backloading, but that's essentially what I am doing. I get there like half my day of carbs by the time I get to the gym. I work out at night. We have a CrossFit gym, so I'll do the class then. And there's two parts I like about that. Now we're just talking shop here. Let's just say,
it's all good.
but I like that because first of all, I save the reward for after the gym.
Yeah,
I can easily make it to 4 p.m. and get to the gym with plenty of enough carbs and enough protein and low enough calories, 12, 13, 1,400 calories, where I'm fine. Like I'm great. And then afterwards, I still got 1,000 calories or more that I backload, and I'm more insulin sensitive, muscles are sensitive right after that. So it feels very rewarding for me. So as a routine, I know if I track that top half of my day, which generally follows our GFIT philosophy, and then I make it to there, I have a GFIT dinner, I have a little snack, I have a little maybe extra like side small meal, and I'm like, it doesn't
yeah,
sacrificing it all.
I agree with you. I'm the same way. I have to delay that gratification until the end of the day because I'll tell you, anyone that's listening, man, like I promise you, you put donuts out there at the table, and if I say no, I promise you I can eat six of them. It ain't a problem. I got no problem doing that. I just can't do it because like like it's a that's my addiction, right? Is that dopamine hit of those
Oh
donuts. So
yeah.
it's like I see that and I'm like, no, that's a back half the day. So I love that idea too. That's a good one.
Geniuses delay gratification. So,
Yeah, I'll tell my wife.
all right. So there was one last question I had in regards to that, and then I just want to get a little nerdy stuff, and then we can wrap it up. The last thing I really wanted to ask you was, I think it's Don Layman. Is he a protein researcher?
Yeah,
Pretty renowned.
yeah, very prolific. Yeah, he's great.
He mentioned, just to finish on this point about like timing our protein, he mentioned that as we age in the life cycle, that maybe like if you're a teen, you can get 10 grams of protein here, 14 grams of protein there, and it doesn't matter because you have the hormones and the metabolic system kind of make of it anything from it. Whereas when we're later in life, you may need a shot of at least 30 grams of protein per meal to have enough excess to promote protein synthesis in the muscles beyond what we need for all the functions of life. Anything you're aware of that or know of that topic and a believer in that at all? And because of that, does that mean we should at least get certain size protein in our meals and at least have a certain number of protein meals?
It certainly does seem like older adults will need more, what I would call a higher quality protein, and what I mean from that is just a higher essential amino acid content. That now most of what we know about all this, and I think Don would agree, a lot of it's from isolated protein isolates. A lot of it's drink based. So we're
Gotcha.
talking crystalline amino because it's a nice clean model. Crystalline or like free form essential amino acids,
Gotcha.
free
Okay. That's
form.
how I
So
normally
there's
hear it.
no
Okay.
structure. They're just like I have leucine like salt, valine, and I can just they're
They're already
just
broken down,
already broken down.
putting
And
together.
and there's places that sell them that you can buy them from, and they're very I think the old amino energy that Optimum Nutrition used to sell was like it might have just been BCAs and caffeine, but that type of thing. Instead of
Yeah.
BCAs, how those are free, you can get the same thing but get essential amino acids, and they come
Okay.
the same
Okay.
way.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I
I
think
normally just don't use that word. I would normally use free form. That's what I'm used to hearing.
freeform. Yeah,
Okay.
sorry, freeform. I mean, yeah, so freeform essentials, and they're a useful tool to have, because like it's hot here, and a nice trick that I picked up from Ricky Keene, who's a great new performance nutritionist. She used to be at the Orlando City Soccer, and now I think she's actually at the U.S. Women's National Team. But she was doing BCA popsicles, and I was
Oh,
like, that's genius. I never thought of that because you're
yeah.
not going to have them drink whey in Orlando, Florida,
Gotcha.
right? And so you can get the crystalline essentials, or excuse me, the free-form essentials, which I think would be better than BCAs because you can get better muscle protein synthetic response. And you can make popsicles out of them on a hot day, or it's just another tool to play with. You know what I mean?
Right. Especially
So
working with a specific population.
yeah, like kids,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
or like older adults, like they need it in a format that the
Athlete, like
format
get
dictates
creative. Yeah.
intake. Yeah. So anyway, the point is a lot of what we've done is based off either free form essentials or whey protein, soy protein isolate. So I think we have to acknowledge that most of what we've done in this field is at best we've given like a salmon patty, right? Or we've given a hamburger, or there's some people that have done true mixed meals. Our lab is one of them have given like these true mixed meals of like rice and cream cheese and beef, or whatnot. There's very few of those that have given like a mixed meal and looked at that. So I think we have to acknowledge that, but I would certainly agree with Don that older adults probably are going to need um, a little bit more protein, maybe just to get that higher essential amino acid content in their diet in order to turn over those metabolic processes that he's talking about.
Is there any quantity of protein that could be dangerous if it crosses? I thought I saw one time I saw that like older traditional societies maybe like had an intuitive intelligence to make sure they were eating at least certain amount of fat from the organs and stuff so that they weren't crossing like 50% of their calories. Where that it can trigger some issues if your protein is way too high as a percentage of calories, whether the other calories are coming from fat or carbs, over 50% may be problematic. Is
Yeah,
that
so that's a good point. I was thinking you're asking about how many grams a day. From a grams per day perspective, yeah, it's probably irrelevant unless you have like chronic kidney disease or something like you have some sort of issue. But even Stu's got a lot of good tweet tweet rants about that. That's worth checking out. But from a like a health standpoint, there's probably doesn't seem like there's a huge risk of the amount that you can take in that's going to lead to some sort of deleterious effect. You know what I mean? But your point is actually really good about percentage of calories. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't know what that break point is, but it came from the old American trappers out in the West, where they'd be trapping a lot of game meat, particularly lean rabbits, squirrels, and so they're eating all this lean meat. And I forget I think it might be called like I forget what it's called, but the point is they weren't getting a lot of fat. they weren't getting any other macronutrients, and so they were getting they're having a lot of problems. So yeah, there's certainly a break point at which you can't just eat protein. You need some other. I mean, I know people are doing the carnivore diet, but you got to remember they're eating these fatty pieces of meat.
Yeah, people who do
Um,
carnivore well, I feel like they do a good job of eating the fatty cuts, not like
right.
filet mignon or
Right. Yeah. So
breast.
you can't just eat pure protein
Right.
substrate. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I don't know. I'll be honest with you. I don't know what that break point is, but that's where it comes from. Is those old American trappers back when they're trapping beaver and they'd be eating a lot of rabbit and squirrel, they would get, I think it was like lean meat disease or something like that.
Yeah,
You
yeah, yeah.
know.
I did. Okay, that's where it's from, actually, that you say that now. Is there any other nutrients to be aware of to consume if your protein intake is really high? Like, can protein turnover and all that and metabolizing protein deplete any other nutrients?
I think the main thing there is actually, probably pre and a probiotic, right? Make sure you get enough fiber, I think would be the point
Okay.
you're getting at. I mean, you're asking the GI to do a lot. Protein does require a lot to be broken down. So if you're having like really high, I know of a study that Joey Antonio, they did like 4.4 grams a day for like 12 weeks. And we talked to some of the participants in the study. They're like, the only way we could do it was with like a pre and probiotic. And that's an extreme, right? 4.4. That's like a great like science thing. It's not really probably practical, but it certainly seems you're getting those super high points at taking in some pre and probiotic, whether it's in Greek yogurt or however you want to do it, is probably a good path forward.
What is the stressor on the GI? Is it just in and of itself it's hard to digest, or is it
Well, yeah, think about like when you're eating a protein
health?
source, the proteins have like a real structure to them, right? Like
Yeah.
like if you hit a steak, it's going to be a lot more firm than if you hit like rice, right? Your finger's going to go through rice. Your finger's not going to go through a steak. So it's got to be broken down with the gastric juices and stuff like that. So that's kind of what I mean. It's like I mean, if you chew your food really well, then that'll help too, right? That's
Right,
like
right,
what
right.
your mom would say. In fact, if you look, this is a point where your mom's right. If you look, they've done studies where they compare people that have dentures, so therefore they have very poor mastication or chewing, versus people that don't, that have much better chewing. And those that have dentures actually have a lower rate of appearance of the protein coming into the plasma because all the digestive enzymes are having to do it versus it getting mechanically chewed in your mouth first.
It's
So,
amazing how much cooking and chewing is a part of the food processing and digestion that I think
totally overlooked.
mom tells you to do it, and we kind of like, yeah, mom tells you to eat your vegetables, mom tells you, but it's like, yeah, it's true. Actually, it's a huge part of making food available in the digestive tract. Do you have people at certain ages because they weren't eating enough protein throughout their life? Maybe people that are coming off of vegetarian diets or people that get older and their gastric juices are not as prevalent or not as valuable that they struggle to digest protein?
I have no idea. I That's actually something I've talked to multiple people in our field about, and we're pretty interested in trying to like look at these people. Now that you're finally probably starting to get to this point where you could study people that have done a vegetarian or vegan diet for a long time, or vice versa, right? And
Yeah.
could we potentially get them willing to cross over at least one time just to see what the response is? I mean, that'd be really cool to look at, but no idea. I mean, in theory, if they're eating a very plant-based diet, they should be getting a lot of fiber, and that GI tract should be pretty healthy. I would guess.
What about the acidity of the stomach from protein? Protein will cause more acidity in the stomach, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm getting a little out of my depth there,
Okay. Okay.
to be honest with you, but I am not real sure on that one. I guess it probably does. I admittedly I'm the more I've been in the protein research, the more I'm getting interested in like what's going on in the GI. When I first started, it was like, well, it goes in and this appears in the plasma, but now it's kind of like, what's going on there? Like that's something I'm really interested in. That's why I kind of brought up the pro and prebiotic is that you look at some of these probiotic supplements and they are increasing the appearance of the amino acids into the plasma. So it sounds like you might actually know more about that than I do. So
Mine's more just anecdotally from working with people and then like trying to research it on the side and seeing that people that tend to not get enough protein tend to struggle when they reintroduce it in the beginning and they can adapt. Also, I feel like those are the people that have more bloating issues, more SIBO issues, more of the common digestive issues are the people that tend to be, once again, this is not a plant or a meat thing.
yeah, yeah.
I'm just looking for truth.
You
But
eat you eat over 1 pound salads. Like
right,
clearly
right,
you're
right, right.
taking it.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. I'm
like
down. I'm down with the plant
yeah,
thing. It's just,
yeah, yeah.
but there's a role in having proteins that I felt like I've noticed that digestive distress tends to happen in people that are avoiding those foods way more than people that are getting them. Even though they're getting fiber, they're getting they may be missing a certain amount of aminos, I guess, to
Mhm.
kind of stimulate those gastric juices habitually. I'm talking about over years. But then
No, I never thought of that. I never looked at it that way, to be quite honest with you. I'm gonna have to dig into that a little bit. I appreciate
let me
you.
know. Let me know what you find because
Yeah, yeah, I
you'll be
appreciate you. That's
from a deeper.
some protein metabolism researchers will see this and be like, man, he's an idiot.
No, I don't even have to like. I just anything that I always comes to my mind. I'm just an interested learner myself. So I just and I'm not. Look, I went to school for accounting. I got into this out of passion and working with people and just trying to find answers. But I'm not in a lab. I'm reading other
No.
people's research. I'm reading other people's opinions. I'm learning from working with people anecdotally and seeing what I'm seeing. But I love talking with you guys who are actually seeing it too, like in
Oh
laboratory
yeah, yeah, yeah.
settings and controlled
Someone's gonna one of my friends are gonna see this and be like, David, you know this, you know.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
No, I don't. That's cool. That's interesting. Yeah, I'd like to dig into that. I appreciate bringing that to my attention. I guess I'd always thought about it in reverse, you know, of like someone that's gotten used to like these plant sources and therefore extracting the amino acids out as much as possible and getting really efficient in order. And then if you gave them some sort of like more digestible, even like an egg, you know, if you give them an egg, they should,
Right.
right, they'd be even more a greater ability to absorb it. But I never thought about like getting used to the acidic load, you know, because you bring up like an interesting thing as we're talking here. We're kind of like going around the point of like there's this concept of carrier foods, and people like so a good example of it is like hummus. If you put
Mhm.
hummus out, people are going to be way more likely to eat vegetables,
Oh
right?
yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah. And so it's like, well, what's the carrier food with these protein sources we're talking about? I don't know if I have a good answer for that. You know, I think that's something that's maybe not often considered across a lot of different realms of nutrition resources when you eat you know when you eat a burger, what do you bring it in? When you're eating a steak, what do you bring it in, right? Because a lot of people, they eat a burger, it's fries in the US.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, right. If they're eating a steak, you know, broccoli, asparagus usually gets
Right.
served with it, right? Like, you know,
Right.
or and I'm just using beef as to be a like for like there. But you know, like if you're eating same thing you're eating Impossible Burger, probably eating it with fries. You know, if you're eating tofu, you're probably eating it in a stir fry. Like, so what's the carrier food that these different proteins are bringing? I think is a very interesting concept.
I often say burgers getting blamed for what the fries are doing.
I like that. I like that. Yeah.
All right, so I think that covered all the major stuff. The last question I actually have is just working out. Is there a gains window an hour after? Is that a true thing, or is it not as
Uh, there
more?
is, but it's a lot longer than people think. So if you work out, the data, I've said these people's names a couple times, but like Stu Phillips has got like the seminal paper showing this back in 1997. He actually postdoced with the people I postdoced with. That's how I know him. But and he's also very prolific. But he did a study where they had them exercise like 7 or 8 leg extensions to failure. Very controlled model, but that's nice in this situation. They tracked the sensitivity of the muscle to for like up to like 48 hours post. And the take home point is that the muscle is more sensitive to nutrition for 48 hours, at least 48 hours following an acute bout of exercise. Now, from a pragmatic standpoint, no one's going to wait that long, right? So
Right, right.
I think it's always, you know, I always get asked this question too, and it's like I think from a pragmatic standpoint, like for me, it's just maybe same as you. It's I got some sort of like liquid nutrition right there. You know, sometimes I forget it and I gotta like grab something at the gas station, one of those little things, but just something easy to get it down and get it in. That way, you know, I'm just not forgetting about it. It's just easy
Right.
and pragmatic. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so much of this is like, and we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but I see people get neurotic and get lost in the theory,
Yeah.
and they don't get into just like if you could just do the basics consistently, it all adds up. But no one wants that. Everyone wants the fast thing. It's funny how like expert and neurotic people become when they're not even focused on just doing the basics over and over again. But not saying like they're looking for a magic pill, but I think they're trying to take a leap real quick without just realizing that all the magic is had in that day to day, getting the minimum protein, eating the foods you like, being consistent, like all the exercise. Like it's just like everyone's
Yeah.
always something, and they're doing so much exotic shit that they're not even doing the what
I,
basic wise.
I like the phrase of like, just don't live like an undergrad. You know what I mean? And I'm speaking from experience there. You know what I mean? Like if you look at
Right.
the data, like sleep restrictions, brutal. Uh, binge drinking will absolutely shut their. I mean, they've tested all this. You look at, you know, sleep restriction and deprivation are going to shut the response off. Sleep restriction like at least, they're only getting 4 hours a night. If you do high intensity exercise, that can at least rescue the response. They haven't
Really?
tested it with, yeah, yeah, that can rescue the muscle protein synthetic response too. And that was done over the course of like a week. They measured it over the course of the week. So that shows that it's at least you could run that program for
Consider
about a
high
week.
intensity training. What do you
Yeah,
consider to offset?
yeah, it was they did it with HIIT. So I forget the intensity they got to, but just that was able to like maintain the muscle protein synthetic response during sleep restriction, whereas those that didn't exercise and restricted sleep, it was lower. So that you could run that program for at least a week. I don't know how much longer you could go with it, maybe, but I don't know. They've done a binge drinking model, PAR, 2016 and plus one, it was like 12 plus or minus two drinks. Because I always get asked, well, what if you think I think a beer is a good post-workout drink. I'm like, a beer, maybe. 12, no, right?
Right, right.
And it just crushes the response. And then at that point, you start getting into, like you said, sort of consistent like physical activity. If you do a step reduction protocol and you extrapolate out over the course of the year, you're talking about like a loss of like I think it was like 3 or 4 pounds in the legs alone of muscle mass. So, just park the car at the far end of the grocery store, or if you're in
Right, right, right.
I'm in a parking garage, I try to at least park on the third or fourth floor to just go up and down the stairs, so there's now you're talking about like some sort of structured exercise, which is what you and I think keep kind of really talking about, some sort of training. It doesn't have to be hardcore, but some sort of training, getting some of that in. So like you hit those kind of like and then the fifth one is like good general health, right? Like for men, are your testosterone levels kind of normal? Because that's a huge, huge fluctuator for us. Women have some of those needs as well, but like, so are the labs good? And like you get those five things, right? And now you start getting into in the total protein intake. You got like the solution is kind of in there.
You're doing the best you can. That's
Yeah, like
handle those things is like whatever else
so,
happens.
yeah, some of these things about like the distribution or like some like the like common nutrition arguments you see on social media nowadays is like, man, we're really splitting hairs, like
Yeah, yeah, I think that's the point. And I think
yeah,
some people do it because they want to sound like they know something.
yeah, like it's like I don't know what works for you. Are you hitting these goal targets? It sounds like you're along the same path. So I'm preaching the choir here, but yeah, I don't know. This is the presentation I've started to give, and people are like, it's like their favorite. Okay, cool. Let's roll with this. This is easy. We can get you to do this.
I'm a pretty humble dude, but I would say I am lean. I do have great blood work. I'm 43 years old. I'm a dad. I'm normal stuff. I'm a very average exerciser out here in my gym. I'm not like my wife and everything. But I feel like the superpower has been consistency.
Yeah, I feel you on that. My wife is like the ultimate responder. Like she was a swimmer in college, and we talk about like being able to blow through calories and just like that
Yeah.
that mental fortitude she has. Like I'm like, oh, I forgot my AirPods today. I gotta run back to the house and go get them. And she's like, I don't get to do that in the water. You know what I mean?
All
So
right.
like, yeah, I know that was funny as soon as you said, yeah, my wife's a stud with that stuff.
Yeah, she's a monster, and I got to keep up with her. So
Yeah, I hear you.
gives me
Yeah,
accountability. Last thing I want to talk to you about was some of this nerd stuff, and I'm not sure how deep we can get,
perfect.
but and I'm mainly bringing it up because when you're in the longevity space, and you're watching a lot of the guys, I won't say any specific names, but I'm sure you know a lot of the popular guys in the longevity space. Some of them really put out some great stuff. But some popular topics are specifically related to protein and this is a little more old school and I think some of this like even goes back to like the China study and things like that, where it's like, oh, protein is causing cancer and these consumption of animal foods are causing cancer and high protein can spike mtor and mtor is, can signal these other things. Do you have any issues with mTOR, or are there any topics related to longevity and protein that are you're researching or that are concerns related to higher amounts of protein?
I think it's so funny, like particularly in the protein world, because we're very like we do a lot with muscle, so we're always looking for an activation of mTOR because mTOR is a master regulator of like getting the rest of the protein synthetic machinery to go up. But you can give like rapamycin to a human, and you'll get a blunting of mTOR, but you still get protein synthesis muscle. So it's like we could talk about mTOR, but like what about like focal adhesion kinase, which is like mechanical transduction signal? What about the STARS signaling pathway? What about MAPK? What about ERK? What about, I mean, humans, you gotta remember like a lot of mouse work is very important because it like really establishes like mTOR phosphorylates X. And it can, and it ends up being so powerful in them that they can knock it out. And they're always looking for like a, well, they're looking in mice models. They're usually just giving enough to make sure they get a signal. It's not necessarily about it being a relevant dose. That's something that's worth considering. And like one of the first things I was taught was like give enough to make sure you get a response. So because I've done some nice work, make sure you give enough to get a response. That's like the mantra there. And it's important, right? Because you do need to get a response of whatever pathway you're looking at to see, does it really do this? And that's important work. But in a human, I mean, there's so much redundancy in it. You can't just make sure you crash the whole thing, right?
Right.
Um, because there are implications. But in other tissues, yeah, probably getting like hyper chronic activation of mTOR is probably maybe not good. I don't know if we have a great answer to that.
Can you explain? I feel like you would be able to do it better. If not, all good. But can you explain what mTOR does?
Yeah, so it's actually the mTORC1 complex that's important in this case because mTOR is short, but it's million target of rapamycin complex 1. So it forms this complex and then it phosphorylates probably a more important protein called P70 or S6K1. And uh, that protein in particular has been shown to be related to increases in muscle hypertrophy. So it's this mTORC1 is kind of like what we would say is like a master regulator of that like downstream activation of the protein synthetic machinery of translation initiation, the beginning of making new proteins, making the ribosome bind to the mRNA and bring in the amino acids from the plasma into the intracellular space and make new proteins. I
Okay.
hope that is, it would be like the foreman showing up to the construction site and saying, "Yep, we got to fix this. The hurricane came through. These bricks need to be taken out. New ones got to be getting put in."
And it's a
That's
key role in health, muscle development, and all that, correct?
Yeah, yeah. It's a very yeah. And I remember listening to a podcast from Keith Barr, who's at UC Davis and he's done a ton of great rodent work. Actually, he's got the paper that shows that P70 is related to muscle hypertrophy. And he was like, it's just the low hanging fruit at the time. There's probably tons of these other molecules we're entirely missing. And in fact, if you look at a paper from I think it was 2017, where they did like some sort of high intensity interval training. Sorry, my nitrogen gas is getting in the lab right now. They did high intensity interval training in humans, and they did like a multi-omic analysis. And AMPK is like similar to mTOR. They're always thought to be like opposite of each other. AMPK is energy regulation, and they mapped like this phosphoproteome of everything that was downstream, and only four of these things that were highly upregulated with high intensity interval training actually mapped back to AMPK. And my point there is we think of AMPK as this master metabolic regulator, but then when you look at it, when we measured everything that we could, only four of these like thousands of proteins were actually regulated by AMPK. So my point is like we know that pathway very well, but we don't know what's going on. There's so much else it could be doing.
Right,
You
right,
know
right,
what I
right.
mean? Yeah, we're like we're not even in the map quest days. You know what I mean? Of like understanding that regulation. Like we're starting to get there.
And
You know?
I think what you bring up there is something that like as someone who's not a
Yeah,
researcher, sometimes common sense for me is when we try to artificially control things without even realizing all of the mechanisms and all the things yet, and how it's all so synergistic that when you artificially control one number or one variable, we don't know the downstream effects of all that. That's just like my opinion. I always give like a shallow analogy, like people are taking high levels of calcium without even considering how it's being absorbed or the other effects it's having, or people will try to artificially control cholesterol to extremes without realizing some of the other effects, or maybe eating the wrong foods that actually drive up insulin resistance just to keep cholesterol up. There's just so many things I feel like sometimes we become fixated on in isolation that, and the reason I'm bringing up the mTOR and the protein thing is because I think protein's getting really popular right now.
yeah,
Last few years, it's become popularized as a health
yeah.
component of longevity and function. It's just that some of those older school days, I feel like it was demonized because even related to longevity, a lot of these
Yeah.
long specialists are like, oh, don't eat it and avoid it because this is what some other societies have done to live to 100. And
Well, what's interesting about that is there's a paper that just came out that said where the majority of centenarians live is a high degree of falsified birth records.
Yeah, I know. I
Yeah,
saw.
yeah. So, there's that. And then the blue zone thing is certainly interesting because they totally miss the fact that those people tend to have a purpose because they're close to family, they're close to friends, they live in walkable areas, they have a high level of physical activity. I mean, like in that case, I think the protein becomes the red herring, because it's the thing we think we can modify.
Yeah.
And you have to like tip your hat to the epi world a little bit because they do find these associations between protein intake and certain disease outcomes. But when your odds ratio is like 1.5, you really have to be able to explain why. And so it goes back to that point about I was saying about like, what's the carrier food?
Right.
How are they categorizing these different protein
Right.
intakes or these different protein sources? And I'm not saying they're not doing a good job. They're probably doing as good as they can, but do we have the fidelity to actually capture that? Is my point. From just questionnaires and just asking people, "Oh, what do you eat?" You know,
Yeah.
that's not a hating on the research. It's just like we have to be like I do isotope tracers. They're not perfect. What I mean, we have assumptions in our model, and so we have to understand that epi has assumptions too. And so I'm always curious that like, well, what's the carrier foods? How are we categorizing? Like, is bacon being categorized the same way as like pork loin?
Right.
Is beef sausage categorized the same as? And I know for a fact in some of those papers they're all grouped together. And I know some researchers in that world still group them together, and some are trying, like Lauren O'Connor at Texas A&M does this. I think she's at Texas A&M, but she's certainly one of she's trying to come up with like these different categorization systems to get a broader understanding of like the
Not
types of
lumping,
proteins.
not lumping
You
people
know,
that with people that eat McDonald's or have beers and French fries with it.
right? Yeah, or like I eat chicken. Oh, but it's chicken wings, and I'm crushing like 6 beers while I'm watching the game.
Right. Exactly.
And I'm sitting on the stool, and then I got I'm taking an Uber home, hopefully, or someone's picking me up, and then I go to bed. Versus, you know, so it's like the carrier food and the carrier, activities. I know they try to control for a lot in that literature, and I think they probably do as good of a job as they can, to be fair. Like, tip the hat. But I think there's just a lot of unknowns because when you look at the human, inpatient feeding studies and they give more protein, like stuff that's done at Pimpton Biomedical Research Center, which is considered like, the gold standard in this country, all the biomarkers we have, it goes down for like cardiovascular disease risk and stuff like that. Now, as for cancer, I don't know if we have good markers for that. That I actually have a study I'm trying to get going in cancer patients, so I might have more to say about that in the future. But I do know that ironically, if you give cancer survivors, those that had, I believe it was, colorectal, which is one of the most common types, if you give them a higher protein diet, they actually have a greater survival period. And by high protein diet, I should say higher. And it was above 1.4 grams per kilogram versus those below. And those that got above that value actually doubled their life expectancy from following cancer treatment. So,
Is there any reason for that? Do you think it's just as basic as like the function, rebuilding, repairing, or do you think there's something beyond that?
I think it's probably just, I mean, what does protein do, right? Helps turn over all the proteins in the body. And so, yeah, it's probably I mean, cancer treatment's brutal. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
that's a rough one. So I think it's just helping turn over probably any damaged proteins or helping repair. It's just providing substrate for the body to repair itself. Long story short, you know would be my guess. There might be more there. I mean, we don't know. Like that, to be fair, that study was just like it wasn't designed purposely to do that. It was kind of like a sub-analysis. So we do have to like, admit that. But maybe it just maintained their muscle mass during the treatment course. Since when they came out, they had more to give versus those that didn't. You know what I mean?
Right, right. Like you said, they just had, like we said,
More.
at the beginning, you just have more reserve
Yeah.
hit. You're more resilient. I know Thomas Seyfried, who's like, I got into keto really hardcore for a little while. I know he got into some of that research as far as where they try to control amino acids. That's why he's a keto fan, so you can preserve all that. But they sometimes shock the body by like protein inhibitors and removing all the glutamine in the diet because glutamine could feed certain types of cancers just like sugar could. I know there's some of that, but
Yeah, no, to be fair, you're on like one of these, yeah, there's like glutamine inhibitors is a big drug target, the enzyme there. And actually a little ones I'm more concerned are LAT1 inhibitors, and LAT1 transports all aminos.
Okay.
And it does seem like what I would call the non-essentials, like glutamine, serine, because you have one carbon metabolism pathways, and the serine and like methionine will feed that. And methionine is an essential to be fair, but it does seem like it's a lot of the non-essentials that seem to present more of the issue to the actual tumor cell. So like I am definitely working my work is much more people that already have a tumor and seeing how it affects that, not as much as the development of it. And that's an interesting space. You know what I mean? It's like what's the carrier activities, what's the carrier food groups, what's there's probably a lot of layers to peel back on that onion there, and which is exciting, in a way.
What's funny though is that in all these situations, even if you just bring up that cancer situation in the carrier, that it may even once again place even more of an emphasis on the essential amino acids and eating foods that contain those just for efficiency. So whether we're talking weight loss, or we're talking aging, whether we're talking calorie restriction, it seems like there's a greater emphasis on the quality of the protein if you're either going to have lower protein or if you want to increase your protein. But I just find all that fascinating because I think a lot of people look at protein and they just see like there's 8 grams of protein on this, and they don't
Yeah.
realize that one could be totally non-essentials and one could be a high quality piece of food. What
Yeah, and I'm not hating on this protein in particular, but like collagen is a good example of that, right? You could take 40 grams of collagen and technically it's protein, but it's not really going to do anything for your muscle. Now, there does seem to be some work that suggests that the collagen peptides may be bioactive. I have a colleague that's working on that. That's way outside my wheelhouse, but I just want to put that in there that like there might be something coming that down the road, right? That shows that it does seem to improve like quality of life metrics. That seems to be very consistent, and that maybe that's a non muscle tissue.
what about collagen? If you just break down collagen, doesn't have to break it down and reform it all together again. What about collagen specifically? That's like the common sense question I'm always asking. How
I'm
can
with you on this. I'm with you on this, but I have a colleague that's she's deep, Shaloa Kapiotsky. She's in our ortho department here, and her dissertation was on it, and she showed in middle-aged exercisers, you and I, that I think it was like 6 months of consistent collagen peptide supplementation that has improved like quality of life metrics, and that's consistent with the systematic reviews I've seen. It's like 3 to 6 months shows that
comparison to a group that's taking the same amount of protein? Because I always
that's
women
I'm
get the
with you.
benefit because they just don't eat enough protein. So when they add in collagen, it's like just a bonus that, oh, I feel better or these improvements. I'm like, yeah, probably because you were just under eating. But if you were eating, say, the same amount of whey or meat or eggs,
Yeah.
would you
So
get the
I
same benefit?
I keep telling her we need to compare like that to like the essentials because then you could both kind of get like the
Yeah,
same
yeah.
the same texture and everything, and you kind of rule out the non-essentials, which the collagen's high in, and see
Yep.
what's going on there. Totally with you. Her and I've talked many times about it, but she will continually tell you like it's the collagen peptides, and it's something they can be. There's some data that suggests that they can act as signaling molecules, like like
Okay.
these di and tripeptides. I'm at the limits for the listeners here. I'm at the limits of my knowledge on this.
Okay.
She is certainly the expert, and like I go to her and I talk to her about it, and I think it's interesting. It's certainly, and she'll tell you, she's like, I'm not talking muscle. She's much more interested in the connective tissue piece, and she's gonna have some really elegant studies I think coming here soon that maybe like will help us peel back those layers a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to sometimes there's things in food that aren't just about the numbers or there's these other effects that they have within the body. So
Yeah, I wanted to put that in there. Like I bat like right. I don't know if people notice. Like I'll bash it, but then I also come back and try to say but right, where I'll be like I said this, they said that. It's somewhere in the middle. Like there's a lot of like beyond like those 5 or 6 pillars you and I talked about. There's still a lot of gray area to play in this
but
field.
I feel like good researchers often speak like that because they're
Yeah, well,
into the possibility. They're not just trying to see it one way. So
yeah, because who knows? You know what I mean? Like testosterone when it was first used was like, oh, it doesn't work. You go back and like in the it was that was one that was like, oh, it doesn't work, doesn't improve performance. That was the common medical consensus was that it didn't work. Turns out it works quite well. You know
yeah, I
what I
think I just
mean?
saw something that people on testosterone can build more muscle than people that lift.
Yeah. Who would have thought?
I'm
You
just
know?
making, but it was something like that long lines, and I don't know how legit that was. It was just something I saw in passing.
Yeah, I mean, we've shown that just even like high versus low normal T's, you're still in that bandwidth, right? You're not hypogonadal, you're not super physiological, but just that difference between high and low can cause different amounts of protein to be built. And
What number should I be at right now?
you want to be on the high end of
Oh, man.
normal, high end of normal. You know what I mean? If I keep we have an endocrinologist that works on our floor. That's the beauty of working in a place like this. I'm always like, hey man, I ain't normal. He's like, it's an interesting question. He's like, I can't do that, because they won't treat unless you're
Right, right.
hypogonadal and you're symptomatic. But he's like, it's
I'm not
certainly, it
symptomatic. I think I was 500 and something for
seems like you're doing all right.
total, and my free was good. It was 17 out of 20. I'm not familiar
You're
with
doing, you're
testosterone.
doing good. Yeah. But the point simply there is like, take it back. We've dovetailed into a fun conversation, but take it
Yeah.
back a few points of like, just within that normal range, we get different effects. And back in the day, they said that giving extra didn't work at all. So that's why I always try to be like fair about these new things that are out where it's like, well, I mean, from a muscle perspective, it's probably dead in the water, but if it's improving people's quality of life, it's getting these older adults together to work or people post these ACL surgery. Would it be good for them to help just with some of that pain management, some of that kind of, for lack of a better term, that creakiness they kind of get? You know what I'm talking about? Maybe. We don't know.
But I'll admit, I'm a believer. What I kind of said at this, I'm always open to research. I've learned too many times not to be an absolutist, but even when I tore my ACL, I was taking collagen and vitamin
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
C and bone broth and vitamin C fruits and all that. Just anything I could do to give me a chance to.
Right. Well, that's what Keith Barr's work showed, right? Was that the collagen plus the vitamin C, or I think he did gelatin, but still, right?
Yeah,
That
yeah,
that
yep, yep.
improved the metrics. So that's I'm with you. That's why I just want to make it very clear, like from a muscle perspective, yeah, but there might be something to it in a different system.
And I feel like only ignorant people would talk in absolutes, with the exception of some things that are just obviously well known and proven. And I
Yeah.
like the minded research part of it. What are you working on right now? Where can we follow you?
Yeah.
What are you excited about?
Yeah, and most of the tags are Dr. Milehead on both Instagram and Twitter, and I'm finally kind of like getting the Instagram thing going on Twitter. I share a lot of articles, but on Instagram I try to like there's more room to provide nuance. So I'm trying to do that. Both of those are good places. It's usually an open door. Just don't be mean to me. It'll hurt my feelings. I'm kidding. It is amazing. I'm sure yours is even worse, but it's amazing the direct messages you'll get. Yeah, if you ask me a salient question on those outlets, I'm usually pretty good about getting back to you and giving you an answer. Um, and then just in general, what I'm working on is, trying to, people that have cancer is a big area we're getting into. And then some of these dietary pattern stuff and some of the issues that come along with diabetes and then the progression onto type 2 diabetes. So that kind of that whole area it's a lot, but that's a lot of what's going on right now. What we're trying to get into.
Awesome. Well, I took up way more of your time than I wanted to,
It's all good.
but that was a fun conversation. So, I truly appreciate your time. I hope you don't mind if I ever reach back out to you,
Anytime.
catch up, see where things are. I know you got something to go to, and I'll be sure to share your Instagram account uh, to others, and look forward to seeing what your research is and speaking with you soon, hopefully again.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. Anytime. It's fun.